Mess up my whole thing. Um, I Thank you. I am Megan Schmelzer. I'm on the 0 to 3 infant early childhood mental health team within the Policy Center. And we are delighted to partner with our coming to be more near and dear friends, Allie and Amelia from Children's Funding Project. And I'm going to do a little bit of an intro for both of them, give a little bit of the history of how we came to be today, and then I'll hand it over to the both of them for a really great and detailed afternoon talking about really important funding pieces for our babies and our toddlers today. So, if you are unfamiliar, we at 0 to 3 have been a part of this project. It's called the Financing Policy Project for Infant Early Childhood Mental Health for about the past 9 years or so. And we've worked all the way with up to 36 states currently to help in state teams to help them really try to figure out the funding and the policy pieces and the puzzles to support their infant early childhood mental health systems. And along the way, we have worked with a number of really wonderful national partners to help us in that, national experts, and really focusing on how do we expand the pool of understanding and champions within our infant early childhood mental health workforce, along with state and systems leaders and administrators, especially those who are responsible for making these decisions around financing and policy. So hopefully you can see yourself, if you're joining this webinar today, in one of those buckets. And you're going to learn a lot more today as well. Yes, and please put your hello in the chat from where you are calling in from. That would be great. We love to see where everybody is from around the US and beyond. So I'm going to give a warm welcome to Allie and Amelia and give just a little bit of their bios here. Amelia is the Senior Director of Fiscal Data Infrastructure. And since 2019, she's really helped to expand CFP's fiscal map portfolio and has created some really cool coaching tools. And she's going to share a couple of those with you today and walk us through some of these demos. And she has worked very closely with the different organizations by providing TA and coaching and supervision to contracts with a range of local, state, and national partners. She comes with some history from working in the state of Virginia. And a fun fact, she is a doula. Not only is a doula, but a water skiing doula at that, and travels the world water skiing, which I just love that so much with her husband and son. And then we have Allie, who is the Senior Manager of Partnerships and has been here since 2021. She leads the efforts to build and sustain relationships with national, state, and local orgs to really advance this work. She is a social worker like myself. She's from University of Washington in St. Louis, and she loves food and playing games with her family as well. And so all to say that doulas and social workers can really get into public financing. I never really thought that would be something that I would get super excited about, including like policy and tax, all kinds of information around tax, new revenues and such. That's for webinar number 3. I should also say this is the first part of a 3 webinar series. This one is around finance mapping, the second about cost modeling, and the third one is about filling the gap, and that's the revenue tax policy one that will be digging much deeper into those weeds. So with that, I will hand it over to you and remind folks that if you have questions, we will have time at the end for them. Please put them in the Q&A box and we will do our best to answer all of those questions. So with that, I will hand it over to the both of you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Megan. We're so happy to be here. We're both also just in the infant and toddler raising chapter of life. So we just are so thankful for the work that you all do for our babies. So we're going to talk all about understanding current investments in infant and early childhood mental health. And I'll tell you a little bit about what our organization does and how we're thinking about this 3-part webinar series. So Children's Funding Project, we're a national nonprofit. We've been around for about 7 or 8 years officially. And we were created to really be laser focused on the money that goes to children and youth from cradle to career. So our co-founders before branching off and starting Children's Funding Project. We're really working at the state and community level with children's cabinets and other sort of entities to bring communities together to set these really ambitious goals for young people, and got to the end of those processes many times and just didn't have the funding to back those goals. So our sort of internal catchphrase we have is what gets budgeted gets done, and oftentimes what's not budgeted doesn't get done. So that's what this is all about. We work at the state, local, and we work with Native nations as well to do what we call strategic public financing. And if you go to the next slide, I can define that as picking up where these strategic plans or any set of goals or policy priorities might leave off by then adding the money piece of it. So putting a price tag on how much those different goals will cost to achieve, and then identifying existing and new sources of revenue to fill the gap. Often to get the outcomes we want to see for children and youth, we need to get the people, the data, and the money coordinated and aligned and strengthened. And so today we're talking all about the money, but know that you all are often holding all of those pieces, the people, the data, and the money. So if you go to the next slide, a different way to define what we do at Children's Funding Project is really just help people in states and communities answer these 3 questions. So 1, how much funding is supporting our goals right now, meaning the goals set by your state or community. 2nd, how much will it cost to fund our goals in full? And how do we fill the gap between those 2 things? These are also the questions that you might get in return when you're pursuing new funding. Well, how much do we already spend on this program or service? How much is it going to cost, and where's the money going to come from? So we want to really equip advocates and state agencies and policymakers with the fiscal data to answer these questions. And these are the strategies we use on the right here. Today, we're doing a deep dive into fiscal mapping and kind of getting you all working with some data today. And then we'll talk about the others in some other sessions. So going to the next slide. The plan for today is give you a little preview of what's to come, and then I'll turn it to Amelia, who's our fiscal map guru, and she'll talk about why you might want a fiscal map, the resources we have available to you all, and then we'll do an activity where we have, like I said, we work cradle to career, so we have fiscal data resources that are talk about funding to support children ages 0 to 24. So we want to help you kind of narrow that into the ages you're focused on today. So we'll be a little hands-on and then talk about what you can do with this data and leave time for discussion. So last thing, this next slide is just to show, just to make it really clear that today we're answering this question, and then these are the dates of the next 2 in the series. The last session in the series will really just be like an introduction to tax policy and why we need to all be in the tax policy conversations to sort of grow the pie, grow the funding sources that can go to the things we care about. So hoping you all stick around for those pieces. And with that, I believe it's time to kick it over to Amelia.
Thanks, Allie. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Definitely happy to be presenting to this audience again. So CFP, we've come to a fireside chat in 2023 to talk about fiscal mapping. And then we were also at the FPP convening in Minnesota last year, and just very energized by the energy that you all bring to the work, and other 0 to 3 partners that are on this webinar today too. Thank you all so much. And for anybody that wasn't at those 2 meetings, or just needs a refresher, I'm just going to take a moment to define what is fiscal mapping and describe why we need them to enhance the work that we do. Oops, sorry, jumped ahead. Okay, so fiscal maps are data tools that foster dialogue on current spending, like that first question that Allie showed. What are we currently spending or investing on kids? They tell us who, which is the level of government or philanthropy, invests how much, which is the dollar amount, and in what. So what kind of sector of child and youth services. And fiscal maps provide us data on how much we are spending on children, youth in total, like what's like the general funding landscape. How much are we spending on certain outcomes we care about, on prevention versus intervention. Can also break down like how are we investing across various age groups, and what are various sources of funding contributing at the federal, state, sometimes local and private levels, and much more. Like we collect a ton of data and it can be sliced many different ways. And why? Why do we need to do this? So we need better ways of understanding the public dollars that aren't one of these two views. So I believe that budgets are moral documents. They're also publicly available, but they're far from publicly understandable unless you are a master's in public policy or you work in budgeting. So we try to take these two views, digest them down into what's actually useful to people like ourselves, advocates, service providers, community members, and even like leadership. Because if you ask your legislators, well, how much are we currently investing as a state in kids or for a very specific service? They will have no idea unless there's a fiscal map to really, aggregate all of those different line items together. And we're all painfully aware now that we need, a better way to document public funding and to use that data to enhance decision making. And so, of course, on the left is what a finance and budget professional, what they see, what they understand. And on the right is what a family may experience as they receive benefits from various public funding streams. Neither tells us in a very clear or organized way the total amount that is spent on kids and where those dollars go, what they support. So again, what we try to do is we look at the budget documents on the left and reorganize that detail so it's clear, transparent, and then format that data as a tool that can be used by a wide range of audiences, including advocates, leaders, policymakers, etc. And so we're not trying to, we unfortunately can't untangle this web of the spaghetti slide by doing that, but it creates a roadmap for folks to help them navigate and understand and converse about public funding in a way that really can't be done. And, we've been working on fiscal maps at CFP since the creation of CFP, or Children's Funding Project. And so it's really exciting now that we are, developing more maps across states and localities. We get to accumulate examples of how folks are using their fiscal maps for impact. And I just wanted to share two examples. So these buckets are just like general ways that we've seen multiple people and places use the fiscal map data. There are many more. But so we have a partner in New Hampshire called New Futures. They're the Kids Count data center for the state. But they were very successful in using the fiscal map data to show a trend of static investment in childcare funded by Child Care Development Block Grant, or CCDBG. And showing that static investment and showing data on the need for, increased access, better access to childcare subsidies, they were able to advocate for policy changes that helped reduce barriers for families and ultimately increased access to childcare subsidies. And they did this in an off-budget year because they create and approve budgets every other year. So this was a great policy change groundwork in an off-budget year to maybe set up for future successes and in gaining more money or advocating for additional dollars during a on budget year or a budget cycle year. So that was very cool. And then we also have partners in Nevada that have been using the fiscal map to support their advocacy efforts. We partner with the Nevada Children's Cabinet, and they focus on early childhood services and supports and funding and their definition is for ages 0 to 8. And they're a great example of what you'll hear in our third webinar, that it takes time to make your advocacy efforts successful, but that's okay. It's just a part of the process. And you accumulate a lot of small wins before you may accumulate a big win of generating more funding or advocating successfully for more funding. And so in Nevada, our partners there, they used the early childhood funding portion of the fiscal map in many different ways. It's embedded across multiple partner sites in the state and is a strong asset for their Early Childhood Advisory Council, their ECAC. And they've been trying to use it to secure new revenue sources by analyzing where the gaps in funding may be. And they have presented it to their finance committee. They've used the tool, and the state treasury has used the tool to show where there is like what they call investment money. So money that doesn't flow through the legislative process. And like I said, this past year, they weren't successful in actually capturing those funds for early childhood, but they're still trying. They're going to try again this next session, I think. And for me, it's just an amazing, huge win that finance committee, the state treasury has seen and used this tool and may use it, in the future to successfully capture those funds. So if you're curious about hearing more ways states and localities have used their fiscal map data, please reach out. We do have a lot of these use cases, and a lot of times they can be really helpful just to get people on board with the fiscal mapping process, using the fiscal map, etc. Let's see, I'm just gonna check the chat quickly. Okay, still doing introductions, that's good. We'll have a dedicated time for Q&A, but I'll periodically try to glance at it if there's something that I can say live. But now let's get into some fiscal mapping resources. So I'm going to show you where some of our materials live on our websites. And then in a minute, when we do the activity, I'll show you how to better navigate them and really extract that data. We'll also drop these links in the chat, and they are embedded into the slides in the PowerPoint, which I'm sure will be shared out after the webinar. So let's see, bear with me as I toggle screens. Let me make sure you're seeing the correct screen. Okay, great. So this is our website on Children's Funding Project's website that houses all of our state and local fiscal maps to date. If you scroll down, you learn a little bit more, like I said earlier in the introduction, about what is a fiscal map and why do we do it. And then if you scroll further, you see this map of fiscal maps, and any place that is highlighted in a lighter blue, we have a state map for, and then the circles show where we're starting to accumulate these local fiscal maps. Just a few notes here, because I saw a few people in the chat from both California and New York. If you click on that now, it says the fiscal map is currently in development. We should have that data publicly available very soon, but if you're curious about it, please reach out to me. This was more so partnership navigation and development that we weren't ready to post it publicly just yet, but we are working on updating that data right now. And then same in California, we will have a draft of their fiscal map available to be shared really, I think by the end of this month, which is exciting. A few more notes. So if, as you poke around and maybe look at your state and neighboring states, you may see different data visualization formats. That's because we've been working on this now for a few years. And as if you can imagine, it takes a few years to map all 50 states. But we are working to get all the maps uniform and up to speed in our most pretty and easily to navigate version. So if you look at the Maryland map or the Arkansas map, those are our new versions of the fiscal map. And right now, as we speak, we're working on updating the rest of the states to look like those too. What else? Ohio, that will be posted very soon, as well as Wisconsin and Hawaii. So that's exciting, because I also saw a few people from Hawaii on the call. And over the next 3 years, so from 2026 to the end of 2028, we will be filling in the rest of this map. Our goal is that by the end of 2028, we will have cradle-to-career fiscal maps for all 50 states, which is very exciting. And our plan is to keep that data updated over time, every other year, if not every year, if we can make that work internally. And then, so for right now, so if your state is in a dark blue, have no fear, because we do still have some fiscal data available for you to be used right now. Another part of our website is this federal funding database, which houses federal funding streams for children and youth services. And it says here, we have data for over 304 federal funding streams that support cradle-to-career initiatives. And what's really exciting, again, for those states that don't currently have a full-fledged fiscal map, we do have the federal data broken down by specific state. So you can zoom into Colorado, for example, and see the full list of federal funding streams and how much was obligated to your state over the years we have mapped. And in just a second, I'll bring us back to this tool and show us how to use that for our fiscal mapping purposes. Okay, so those are where our two main databases and sources of fiscal map data live. Let me go back to our PowerPoint, and then we can get into the activity in just a moment. Okay.
While she's pulling that up so when you're on this, if you lose these links in the chat, when you're on the children's funding page website, you just go to our work, fiscal mapping, and then all of these resources live there.
Yep. Thanks, Allie. And I see in the chat, there are lots of eager participants for our states that we need a map to be mapped, which is awesome. And since we're running just a few minutes early, I can say that if you are interested and you feel like the organization that you work for would be a good candidate, please reach out to me, email me, and I'll put you on our list of contacts, to reach out to once we're ready to add more states. So for the next wave of states, I will be reaching out to folks with an application in January and starting new fiscal mapping in the spring. And then we'll do that every year until we reach all 50 states, which will be by the end of 2028, because that's what we're on the hook for. And that's my big goal. So please reach out to me if you're interested. And thanks, Sally, for putting in my email. And again, also, in the PowerPoint, there's a link here to the map of fiscal maps and also the federal funding database. Okay, so now let's get into the activity. We have tried in the most cohesive and easily shareable way to get you started on your own fiscal mapping journey, because even though I would love to be able to make early childhood and IECMH specific fiscal maps for all of you. That's probably not feasible. It is not feasible, but there are, because we have a lot of the data available online and the tools to equip you how to do it. I think that's even better. So we're gonna show you a workbook that we created and the directions that we have set up to get you started on your own fiscal mapping journey. And first, before I really like share, I'm going to start sharing some Excel files and again my screen with the databases. I wanted to let you know that we modified this fiscal mapping workbook off of a document that was initially created as a TA tool from the federally funded compendium brief authored by Jen Oppenheim. And I adapted it so you can now include data on the dollar amounts, like how much funding from the federal and state level is allocated for the various funding streams. But I wanted to let you know that this is not my creation. I have adapted, oh, sorry, my dog's barking. I have adapted this resource from the compendium brief authored by Jen Oppenheim. And I'll demonstrate how to start filling it out. If you'd like your own copy of the workbook to fill out on your own, please email Megan and she can share that with you. Okay. So let's see, let me open up. First, I'm just going to share this file. So this is, if you email Megan and would like a copy of your workbook, this is what you will receive. There are multiple tabs, intro tab, and then we get into the heart of it. So first, one tab solely about federal funding. And you can see we have detailed directions here. I've also included even more detailed directions on how to navigate like our federal funding tools on our slides, again, for you to reference. But just wanted to give you, a brief overview. So this first tab has all of the federal programs that Jen has flagged that can support IECMH services. Then I have added in column J, sometimes the program name differs from the federal grant name and unique identifying number. And so when that is the case, I have put, that federal identifier, that more specific federal grant name, and the CFDA number, which is how you can easily find it in our database. And I'll show you about that in a minute. Then here in these columns, you can input the total funding amount. And as you scroll, you can add more information about how that funding is used in your state, who in the state you can reach out to learn more. And then as you'll see in a minute, and as you'll see maybe as you look through these funding streams, so if you are really, really interested in just the funding that goes to 0 to 5, but there are funding streams like Child Care and Development Fund, Child Care and Development Block Grant. This funding is allowable to be used for ages 0 to 12. But again, you really want to hone in on what supports 0 to 5. You can talk to whoever your state contact is and interview them. Say, hey, do we have any more detail about the recipients of these CCDF funds? Do we know how much of the total amount of CCDF goes to 0 to 5? And when you figure that out, you can put that dollar amount here. And then these columns will really give you that detailed, more accurate estimate of how much funding in your state goes to 0 to 5 or IECMH services. Okay, and so this first tab, all about federal funding. Then in the workbook, I've added 2 tabs to start inputting your state funding for 0 to 5 or IECMH services. So there's one tab for if, yes, you do have a fiscal map. So FM stands for fiscal map. If your state does have a fiscal map, here are directions of what to do to start to extract that data for your own analysis.
Hey, Amelia, can you zoom in just a little bit? We got a request.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. Let me see if that's helpful. Is that better? Okay. So state funding research, yes, fiscal map. This means that your state does have its own fiscal map to work from, and there are different directions for how to extract that state level funding. And then for those that do not have a state level fiscal map, some other suggestions and directions for what you can do to start gathering that data on your own until we have your own state mapped, which will be soon, I promise. And then one more tab in the workbook. I have just included a list of other budget document resources that we use to help you, again, just learn more, dig deeper into specific funding streams. And there are some state budget analyses that are available online for states that we have not yet mapped. But I saw in the chat, there are a number of people here from Florida, Illinois, and New Mexico that you can use these resources instead of our own CFP's own fiscal maps for now. Okay, so I think now I can get started with our activity. This will be my first time doing like a live activity on Zoom, so I'm just going to try to take my time, and I may be flopping screens back and forth, but I will try to take my time and not go too quickly. And I also have what I've done is I've pre-populated this workbook for our partners in Utah, who I've talked to a number of times and have started to work with. So I got their go ahead to use their data. But what I'm going to show you live is kind of how I started to pre-populate this using the federal funding database from CFP's website and the Utah State Fiscal Map from CFP's website. Okay. And please, yeah, just let me know if I need to zoom in or go back to a different screen. But so here you see that I have started to fill in some dollar amounts and notes about these specific funding streams and programs. First of all, something to flag is, like I said, sometimes the program name does not align with the federal grant name because for many reasons. Sometimes one federal grant can fund multiple programs, and Jen may have just pulled out the program specific to IECMH within that fully authorized funding stream. Also, like I said, so sometimes one funding stream can fund multiple programs. So when that is the case in this workbook, I have made note of that this funding stream is authorized by this, this program is authorized from this funding stream above. So you don't need to duplicate adding in the dollar amounts. Last caveat, you see here, Utah does not receive the Child Abuse and Neglect Discretionary Activities Grant. That's okay. Not all states receive discretionary funding and discretionary grants. That can also be used as a tool to investigate further. Like, why does Utah not receive this funding stream? Is it because we're not eligible? Is it because we applied and weren't awarded? But that could be potential ideas for new revenue streams going forward. Okay, so let's see. What I'm going to show you is how to find the funding streams in CFP's federal database and how you can start filling out these obligated funding amounts. So let me share my screen again. I'm going to go back to the federal database. Let me see. Okay, now you can see it. One thing that's great about this website is you can expand it to this full screen mode, which I highly recommend because it just helps you see the full picture much more clearly. And because we are working with Utah, I'm going to clear Colorado and find Utah. So now Utah's selected, and these are all of the funding streams and amounts specifically obligated to the state of Utah. Another thing that I'm going to do, which I've included in the directions in the slides. So because I've done this a few times myself now, easy way to find the funding streams that are in the workbook is to use this federal budget item number column. And so I'm going to click this little caret and sort it to be descending from highest to lowest, because I've also found that most of the funding streams of interest are in this 9.3 point something range. So you don't have to hunt and peck as much. Let's see what I can do. So I'm going to let me see if I can move this screen over. Well, maybe the easiest is just to toggle back and forth. Okay, so I found my state. I have filtered the budget item numbers to be from highest to lowest. Now it's time to find the specific funding stream. Let me share back to here. Okay, so pretend that I didn't already find this. Let's look for child abuse and neglect discretionary activities. 93.67 is the federal budget item number. Let me go back here.
Amelia, you have a question. What does obligated funding amount mean?
That's a great question. So obligated amount is what was initially presented or allocated to a state in the federal budget. And so then that amount is available to be used by the state. The obligated amount doesn't always equate to the appropriated amount. So then once the funding flows from the federal agency to the state, then they can appropriate that amount either by program or by need. And so that appropriated amount could be a little different than the obligated amount, and it certainly could be different than the expended amount. So what was actually spent of that total obligated dollar amount. The obligated amount is kind of like the maximum amount that can be used. And so when you investigate how much of one funding stream went to early childhood services or IECMH services in your state, you'll probably look more at an expended amount. So of all CCDF, Child Care Development Fund money, how much was spent on ages 0 to 5? And that may be what you populate in those other columns down the workbook. But that was a great question. Okay, so looking for child abuse and neglect discretionary activities, 93.67. So I'm in this 93, I see 93.76, and I see 93.67, not 676, I should say, not 93.67 period. So that's why in the workbook, I have said Utah must not receive this funding stream. And then looking that it's a discretionary funding stream makes sense. Maybe they weren't eligible. Maybe they didn't apply. Maybe they did apply, but didn't receive those funds. Okay. So now I'll do one more example when we can find an actual dollar amount. So let's look at the next line item we have in the workbook. Okay. Child abuse and neglect state grants, 93.669. I will say if you have two monitors, this was much easier to do on a two monitor work setup. But so let's look for 93.669 and go back here to our federal funding streams. Okay, 93.669 child abuse and neglect state grants. So then what I did was I scrolled over and I saw the funding amounts here. And so what I did was just on my other screen where I have the Excel workbook up, I typed in each dollar amount per year. And so these columns in this federal funding tool line up with those columns in your workbook. So you just have to do year by year, input the dollar amount. I wish that we could just download this and you could move like as an Excel file and move it over yourself. Unfortunately, we can't share the federal data in that way right now on CFP's end. But I will say a little tedious, but took me 45 minutes to complete the full workbook for all the line items for the federal side. So not too much time. And a good activity if you're just looking for something, kind of like a rote process or something with directions, just to take your mind off any more higher level of thinking.
Amelia, two things. Can you show the chart where you can see how a funding stream has changed over time? And then also we had
Absolutely.
a question about, what this means for, like, is this for the states that don't have a state fiscal map versus, if you do have a state fiscal map? So just to make it clear, if you have an updated state fiscal map, that will also include your federal data. So you won't need to be going to this database, right? But if you don't have one, then this is where you'll get your data. Is that right?
That's right. So Utah does also have a state fiscal map. That data is this data. So our two databases connect and align. I found to fill out the federal tab for Utah, it was much easier to find and search for the funding streams using the federal funding database, just because it includes this federal budget item number and it's a much easier, one-to-one search. You could just look at the state fiscal map, but I recommend that everybody with the state fiscal map or not to use the federal funding database for the federal funding tab of the workbook. And then I'll just show you a cool function of this federal funding database. So if you want to drill down and learn more about one specific funding stream, like this child abuse and neglect state grants, you highlight it or select it, and then click here for more information. Let me zoom out now. And now you can see the funding trend over time, how much was obligated over the different fiscal years. You will see in most of these funding streams a big spike during the pandemic years and fiscal year 21 specifically. Most or a lot of funding streams did receive additional appropriations to support with the effects of the pandemic. And then here you can see kind of how we have described this funding stream in supporting children and youth. So you can see that like the age range, so it can support kids or families with kids from birth to 17, mainly for intervention services. And then to drill down a little bit more, you see it's a formula grant. The original federal agency that administered those funds, and then who those funds normally go to, like who applied and received those funding. So it'd be a state government agency. Okay, so I could show you more examples of going back and forth between the federal funding tab and the federal funding streams workbook, but I think it's pretty easy. And I've included the directions in the workbook itself and in the slides. But if you do have additional questions, please let me know. And now I would love to just show you an example of working, now taking the state fiscal map and the state data and inputting that into your fiscal mapping workbook. So let me go back to our workbook. Okay. I know this because I worked on this map, but Utah does have a state fiscal map with us. So I know we will be using this tab here. But again, if you find that your state does not, you would use the next tab over. And again, I've pre-populated this a little bit, but I'll show you how I used the Utah state map to get started with some of this data collection. So now I'm going to go back to our map of fiscal maps. I'm going to find Utah, view fiscal map. And again, I'm going to go into focus mode just because that will make it a little bit bigger for everybody. I definitely recommend poking around on all of these tabs just to learn more about what the fiscal map holds. But for the purpose of this activity, I'll show you like really the most direct way to access the data that we're interested in. And again, all these directions are in the slides. So you go to the services tab. This looks like a lot. It is a lot. Big caveat that this is one of the pages that we really changed in like our newer visual, and we'll be updating Utah's visuals in a little bit to make it more navigable, easier to navigate. But this is where we can start to take all of the state funding streams and try to drill down and, okay, what do we think goes to early childhood or IECMH services? And I'll show you how we do that. First, because we've already collected the federal funding streams, we want to just zoom in on the state funding streams. And you do that by clicking on state here in this funding level image. And now you can see the data table has changed. The total amounts have changed. So we're just looking at state funding. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go through this list of 60 plus different service types and tease out the ones that we think will lead us to the funding streams or the programs that we're interested in. So what you can do is you go, if you want to look at this bigger, which I think we all do, you can select the focus mode for this visual. And it pops up that list of eligible services. And then I'm just going to go down. Right now I'm going to do this a little haphazardly, but just pick out all of the potential service types that I think we want to investigate further for the purpose of this map. Family strengthening, that'll have a lot of your home visiting dollars. Home visiting has its own visiting. Family strengthening may be just like trying to keep that family unit together and also providing additional maybe financial support to the family unit. Let's see, we have kinship care, maternal and child health, pre-K, prenatal, and then I'm going to do these two provider options. And then when you go back to the report, you see that the visuals have changed again to just show you the funding for the specific services that we selected. Okay, and now really what we want are these dollar amounts, right? So we're going to pop the data table out into the focus mode and start to look at the funding streams. So then what I would recommend you doing is combing through each of these one by one, reading the descriptions. I'll make it a little bit bigger and saying, yes, I want to include this in our fiscal map for IECMH services, or no, I don't think that this is applicable. Like bookmobile may not be applicable to the type of funding that you want to analyze, but probably this child and family services is, or child care assistance, etc. We see children's justice centers. There's a line item for that, community mental health services, etc., etc. So similar thing, I would have on one screen, if you can, this data table pulled out, and then on my other screen, the fiscal mapping workbook on the state tab, and then just moving over the funding stream name and the dollar amounts into the workbook. And I'll kind of show you how I pre-populated that a little bit. Okay, so here I just pulled out a few just to show you an example, but I put in the funding stream name. I put in the dollar amounts that we have data for from the Utah map and went down the list to do that. And what you could do is based on, we do have pretty robust funding stream descriptions for each line item. You could maybe put that in a notes column or details about current use, etc. Okay. I will pause. Well, actually, no, let me go in now to show you, if you don't have a state fiscal map, what I would recommend.
Couple good questions real quick, Amelia.
Sure.
So this last question from Lisa says, then do we connect with the organization to find out the percentage used for 0 to 5 age children?
Yes, 100%. Yes, exactly. So then what I would do next is, once I had all of the funding streams that I felt like I wanted to include in the map or investigate further, I would then try to find someone within the state, like within either the agency or department that may, or even the program that may provide those services, put their name and email address and try to talk to them. I think the FPP state coalitions have a leg up because you have so many different state partners at the table already. You could show this to them and say, okay, who knows more about these funding streams? And then yes, ask them about what's the percentage that goes to 0 to 5, any more details about how it's used for IECMH services. And I haven't mentioned this before, but 0 to 3 had these columns already in the funding compendium workbook to say, like, these are the types of IECMH benefits, and you can like check mark or put an X into the specific, like when a funding stream supports one of these specifically, you can make note of that in these columns here for IECMH. But yes, great question. Okay. So don't despair if you don't have a state fiscal map. You will get started with all of the federal data that you have. And I've tried to provide more information about what you can do to start collecting that state data in the meantime while you're waiting for your state map to come through. So here, let me zoom in a little bit more on these directions. Review, like I said, review this budget document resources tab. We've put, I think, 3 states that have other types of budget analyses or children's budget analyses that you can use, and also more information about federal funding. But what I recommend is, this is what we do when we do our fiscal maps, is comb through your state budget document. It sounds boring, it sounds hard, but you can do it, because if I can do it, you can do it. And that's that's how we collect our data, is we just look through the state budget document, try to flag anything that a line item that explicitly says goes to children and youth. In your case, you could just look for funding streams or line items that go to 0 to 5 and make note of them here. What you may rely on more are your state contacts or any sort of budget contacts that you have to provide you more of that information. Because I will say that some state budget documents are more and less clear than others. I think also here I have said or pointed out that like you can look at your state's entire budget document, but you can also find individual agency and department budgets or financial reports, like on your state Department of Health's website or your state Department of Education's website. So you just have to do a little bit more investigative research and data collection that way. Okay, I think that's all I have for demonstrating the activity. Please reach out if you have any questions, but I'll show you here where I have in our slides where I put these directions. So let me pull up my notes again. Okay, so again, directions. I try to put very detailed directions in each slide about filling out the federal tab, filling out the state tab if you have a state fiscal map, and filling out the state tab if you do not have a fiscal map. But please reach out to me with any troubleshooting or questions.
Two more really good questions that we
Sure.
had. Just that about who can, well, first of all, how frequently do you expect to update the maps? And when you update them, how up to date will they be? And then also what types of entities have we worked with to create the state maps?
Oh, great questions. Okay, and to answer that question, because I am a visual person, I'm gonna go to that map of state fiscal maps. Okay, so first about updating the data. We plan on, until we get all states mapped, I think we will update each state's fiscal map every other year. Right now, like you saw that Utah map only has data up until fiscal year 22. When we make an update, we'll bring that data to the most recent fiscal year possible. So right now we're working on updates for the majority of these states. I think Washington, Nevada, Texas, Arkansas, or Louisiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, New York. We'll bring all of that data up until fiscal year 25. And then when we do the updates again, we'll just try to make it as real time as possible. And then I think once we have full coverage across the country, and if we can figure out how to do it, we'll try to update it on an annual basis. And then for types of partners that we work with, really it is a mix. You know, we just try to work with people that want to have the fiscal map data, want to use the fiscal map data, and a big one, they're okay with sharing the fiscal map data and making it available for other partners in the state to access and utilize as well. We tend to work with an entity within the state that does have strong contacts to what we call budget holders. So either people in the various agencies and departments in the state government that know their line items in the budget really well, and or like they have some sort of connection to legislative finance office or some sort of like legislative branch that can do like a that has an idea of like the full budget. And that's because, like I said, in our process, we scrape the state budget documents, but we like to have that data verified to make sure that what we're pulling is accurate, that we're not missing anything, that we're describing the funding streams well. So that's who we tend to partner with. But just to give you some examples, we have a few state entities that we work with that are like in government, in state government. So Minnesota Children's Cabinet, the Maryland Governor's Office of Children, Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth, and who else? Soon to be Washington. We work with a lot of advocacy organizations. So Arkansas Advocates, Texas, we work with Texas Post. So they're out of school time network, state coalition. In New Hampshire, New Futures, which is also their Kid Scout agency. And I think they focus mainly on advocating for ages 0 to 5, but they were very happy to hold the full cradle to career map. We work with this in North Carolina. It's their state budget and policy research center. And so it really is, it's a mix. We're very open to that. And in some states, like in Hawaii, we work with 2 state leads that partner together, which works out very well sometimes because people may have different relationships or access to that data. Okay, so let's imagine you filled out your workbook. You've collected all the data that you could. You've talked to other contacts within the state to try to find the amount for ages 0 to 5. What do you do with all that data? What's next? And so I've tried to put a few guiding steps, but also when you get to that juncture, feel free to reach out to us as well. So first, I would say you should create some data visuals. There are many platforms for which you can do this. And they can be made like, for example, you can do something as easy as just creating a visual in your Excel document. Or if you have access to like a software like Power BI, which is what we use, or Tableau, that's fine. Or you can even just put information into PowerPoint. But we just think that the visualizing the data makes it more digestible and easier to share with a wide range of audiences. Next, what I would recommend is connecting that raw data to your policy and advocacy strategies. So, and I think this is where data viz helps because it helps you see the data aggregated in this way. So are there any clear correlations between where you find gaps in services or outcomes and where you see gaps in funding? If so, that will help strengthen your case where we need more funding, or may need additional resources, or may need to have conversations about, let's bring folks to the table to talk about our funding streams and how we can better maximize them. You could just do more pure data analysis. You can take your full workbook of data and break it down into how much funding supports each of those buckets of IECMH services that the 0 to 3 team has laid out in those first few columns. You could compare how much funding comes from federal sources, how much funding comes from state sources. Then right now, the additional layer for the federal funding, what may be at risk or frozen or, whatever. That's what we're doing a lot with our state partners right now too, is looking at their federal funding in that way. But you could also, link up with other states that's within this network and within your network. And you may compare your fiscal map data a little bit to learn how you are utilizing federal or state dollars differently. And then, I think in our webinar series part 2 and part 3, you'll also learn how to use the data in those other steps of strategic public financing, to fill in the rest of the questions of this is how much we're currently investing, how much should we be investing, and then how to fill that gap. What else? I would also recommend connecting with partners in your state that may find this data useful for informed decision making, or that you may just want to show them like, hey, we have this now, like, let's talk about it. Let's use it in partnership together. Definitely recommend reaching out to the entity that we worked with to create your state fiscal map if you do have a state fiscal map, and we can help make those connections if you're interested in that. But other types of partners that I would recommend connecting with if you can are children's cabinets, advocacy organizations, legislative finance committees. Because we've really seen that these fiscal maps they can be a great relationship building tool, since the data is useful to so many. And like I said, way in the beginning of this conversation, if you don't have a fiscal map, there's no way to see the funding picture in this way. I know we've answered a bunch of questions kind of along the way, but I would love to open it up to any more that may have popped into the chat, or others that may be sparked since presenting. But I hope that was clear. If you do have questions, like I said, please reach out about the activity.
Thank you so much, Amelia and Allie. I mean, the chat was on fire with folks who were excited and some folks who said, I'm familiar with you, but I haven't really committed to sitting down yet and really digging in. And I think you provided a little bit more bridging to say this doesn't have to be as scary as you think it is. You just kind of have to get in there, set some time, bring some friends along, and jump in. And it's a really valuable use of time. So I wanted to thank you both again. I think you may have answered, it was kind of difficult to keep up with the chat, but which is a good thing. I think you answered most of the questions, but if someone put a question in the chat that, oh, Sarah did. But if you put a question in the chat earlier and we missed it, please put it in again, or again in the Q&A box. That's a little easier to navigate. But Sarah England asked, are there any known increases in IECMH specific funding, a place where states might be able to look for solutions to meet new federal requirements? Not super positive right now, as in 0 to 3 is not familiar with any new IECMH specific funding. Amelia, what would you say to that?
I am not either of like new funding specifically targeted for IECMH services. But I am hoping that as you all create some of these fiscal analyses and share with each other, particularly how your states are funding IECMH services, it may spark some creativity or possible solutions for states to, or for you to find additional funding or leverage additional state funding for your IECMH services.
Yeah, and I would add a couple of things that, the FY26 budget is unclear in terms of what we'll see there when Congress gets through their process. And sorry, I'm Lindsay from 0 to 3. I direct our mental health work in the Policy Center, and I'm on Megan's team. But I would say that we are seeing states tapping into underutilized sources more. And so there may be funding streams that have not historically been leveraged or leveraged heavily to support mental and relational health needs of young kids. That's an area of progress. And one that definitely comes to mind is certified community behavioral health centers. So we know that there are increases in CCBHCs across the country, and CCBHCs serve population starting at age 0. And so that is a great opportunity that we are seeing states tapping into. Our team is actually working on a toolkit right now that to sort of bring like an infant mental health specific lens to CCBHC requirements and guidance. So stay tuned for that to be released in the coming months. But that's one place where I think we're seeing states identifying kind of new funding and opportunity to support mental health. Also, the funding compendium that the tool that Amelia was navigating is based on and drawing from was, I think, is revelatory in some ways, because that was the first time that the feds, with the support from folks like NCCP and others, I think I saw Dan in the attendee list, it was the first time that they inventoried federal funding streams from the perspective of the folks who administer those funding streams to say which of these funding streams are eligible to be used on which of these types of infant and early childhood mental health related services. So there are, I think, surprises in that compendium for some folks, depending on your familiarity with all of these different funding streams that are administered across different agencies within your state. So you may find as you're looking through that funding compendium that there may be funding streams that you have thought of as being more treatment oriented, and the feds in this reporting of eligible uses of funds have said, actually, based on eligibility criteria, these funds can be used also to support workforce development, or these funds are also eligible for use on promotion. So that's something I would really encourage folks to pay attention to. You know, those eligible uses of funding are carried over in the tool, and they also are outlined in the original funding compendium itself. So in terms of new funding, we're certainly not in a climate where we're anticipating huge influxes of new funding in the coming year, but thinking creatively about, yeah, thank you for pulling that up. So you can see where those shaded cells are. I think using this as a guide to think creatively about funding streams that your state may not have tapped for IECMH in the past, or where you may have been using it kind of with a narrow scope and might be able to think more expansively. And we will surely keep you posted as we see changes in the landscape. We try to keep those updates coming to the FPP community. And as we get a stronger sense of FY26 budget and, you know, new or emerging grants or things like that in the federal space, we'll do our best to share that information.
Thanks for hopping in, Lindsay, and also a great reminder of a shout out to our friends Dan and Sheila at NCCP for helping to work on the compendium. A formal shout out and great thanks for your partnership for sure.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring this up to show that you can find the link to that original compendium. We embedded that link here. And I think just to reiterate what Lindsay was saying, that if of these eligible uses of these funds that are IECMH specific, what's shaded is what is authorized by federal code, how funds can be used. But then as you do more investigation into like how your state uses it, you can put an X or like some sort of like, yes, we do use, you know, this program for screening purposes, just to get more detail.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. The questions have slowed down a little bit in the chat. I will say I think I've gotten about 45 new emails in the last hour and a half. So thanks for your grace. That's what we want. But thank you for your grace. It might take me a minute to get back to each of you, but I definitely will. That's the type of engagement that we are hoping and we really want to see. That's what moves the needle in all of this work. So, any last questions? Let me check in the chat. I don't think so. So I think you know where to find us all. Allie, Amelia, any last words for the day?
No, I think we just wanted to summarize your homework or your takeaways here. So again, email Megan if you would like a copy of this workbook, start collecting your data. Please feel free to reach out to Amelia. Here at Children's Funding Project, we say we make these tools, but we need to make them both useful and used. So we want to help you use them. We want this data to be, moving you towards action, and we're totally willing to go back and forth and figure out how to help with that. So this workbook is kind of step one of that, but we hope it opens a conversation. And then truly hope you join us for our next session too. Our colleague Kate will come in, and she leads our cost analysis and modeling part of the shop, where we have to know what we're currently spending, but we have to know what our big number is, our goal of what it will actually take at scale and at quality to fund what we want to do. And she can help with that part so that we can help you get to a gaps analysis that helps really strengthen your case when you go after new funding. So we hope to see you there. And thank you again, 0 to 3 team, for having us. We're so grateful for this partnership.
Yes, this feels like a win-win-win for everyone. So thank you so much. And again, the plug for September 21st is the next one, and September 20th and October 21st are the next ones. Please tell all of your friends. So have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.